Yeah, we're end of end of 12. I think we're finishing up 12 of bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are, and do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals upon their heads. And do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We got down to do not claim to be wiser than you are. And as his general advice, and it's under the major heading of make your love genuine. And we can say those things, but what does that mean in so many of the interpersonal dynamics in our life? And so he starts spelling out a whole lot of them. And this do not claim to be wiser than you are is how far we got down. Now when we think of that admonition, we often can think of persons who get all wrapped up in their own self-importance and seem to know it all. Oh my gosh. We're not supposed to get political, but Trump is an example. He in the campaign, he knows everything better than the generals do. And now our intelligence community, where we've got, people all over the world, their life at risk trying to get information of what's going on, and got lots of information that the Russians had hacked into our system, and they had put influence out there trying to, and then afterwards, when the election was over, they were celebrating that they were effective, and but don't get all wrapped up in your own self-importance and think that you are wiser than you are. But when that happens, we need to realize that there are people who, when they've got that kind of mindset, they will get upset when others don't see things the way they do, and they may have some, good perspective and ideas, but if in their mindset they I don't want to hear any information that's going to change my mind. I am going to deny reality. I am going to deny science. I'm going to deny expert testimony if it contradicts my view of things. Now, it's obvious that when someone has a misperception, then their solution to problems are probably not going to be the right ones. Now, when we get into kind of conflicts with those kinds of things, and people are just not seeing things the same, not perceiving the same reality, it really is difficult to communicate and come out with some healthy resolutions. And so when we get into that, then it can easily turn into power struggles that one who will not understand that the other side has any legitimacy because they're too stupid to recognize things, then often one seizes power in different ways to force their answer upon the solution. And then, it can take on some very negative things that harm relationships, in that one becomes unsympathetic and judgmental toward others. And then it comes to Paul's word, do not be haughty. And that haughtiness is this air of superiority, and others are too stupid or not experienced enough to be at the table and so forth in the discussions. So really Paul's advice is, in the life of the community, is listen to one another and get to know each other's story. Understand where your people in dialogue with, where they're coming from. What are their experiences? Because their experience can be that they've been a victim of something, and they've been traumatized by something. And anything that even is close to putting them back in that kind of situation will make them very, very insecure. And so I had an expression with my youngest son, who from early age, he was really bright, and so the way he perceived things, he just knew that things were right the way he saw them. And so from time to time, I had to remind him that you're really smart, but you do not know everything. And he would have to think about it. And when he was little, his mom came home and he said, Mommy, I'm really smart, but I don't know everything. So good. You're processing that idea, but none of us know everything, and particularly there are so many things in interpersonal relationships and in situations where you have to make decisions in the life of the church, that we really need to listen to one another and get to know one another so that we fully understand the impact of certain solutions. They may be fine for 80% of the folks, but the 10 or 20%, it can be really a very bad way of going about things. So we need to be very careful in that process.
Being smart doesn't grant knowledge, facilitate your ability to gain.
Correct. Yeah, there are, and I make the distinction between smart and wise. You can be really smart, have a really good brain that really processes things well. I mean, you may be a whiz at mathematics, and you may be really great at IT, technology kinds of things. But in life skills and in interpersonal relationships and ways of communicating with one another and empathizing with one another and understanding ways to show love and care for others, that's something that experience and practice takes some time to gain the wisdom. There's a lot of people who are really smart. They see another person's problem, and they'll go tell them exactly what they need to do to fix that problem without knowing the whole story and the whole background. And sometimes there are really strong emotional issues from being traumatized sometime earlier that will make it difficult for one to motivate themselves to go do what they need to do. They may know it and they feel badly, but they just need help, need someone to walk with them through it maybe, rather than just, well, here's the answer, you just go do it. And it's not that easy. Anyway, this spiritual quality is one that I value very highly and try to practice faithfully myself, to not claim to be wiser than I am. even though I may have very strong feelings and opinions about certain things, there's always more information and the latest scholarship and other people's experiences that can shed new light. And one doesn't have to be in a black and white situation. You're completely right or you're completely wrong. There may be you're 80% right, but there's a little piece in there that is incorrect, that's shaping that answer, and it's not completely on target for the perfect answer. But anyway, there are certain things that evidence shows are definitely not an answer sometimes, and that we can eliminate them from consideration. There has been, unfortunately, and it's created a big part of the polarization in our culture, is that on news kinds of things, this is supposed to give equal time and fair treatment to all sides. Well, in so many cases, that means putting on air and letting people argue falsehoods, absolute falsehoods, but in this trying to give equal time to the other side, then it spreads the falsehoods farther and wider and makes people who are having trouble grasping something even more difficult, which makes it not bringing us together, but polarizing more. And it's, I've noticed in the letter to the editor column, the Tulsa World is doing a better job than they used to do to put their little note after someone's letter to the editor. When they are expressing something that is erroneous in their letter to the editor will put the truth of what has occurred. Well, no, some of it just reporting where someone is saying something hasn't happened or that the city didn't do anything, and yet, well, the city passed this ordinance. The city acted on this, but the letter is saying that they didn't do anything. Now, they'll put their column of their opinion, but on the letters to the editor, what I'm talking about is kind of the fact check. If someone's saying something that's totally false in their letter to the editor, to be fair, they'll go ahead and print different sides. But if there's an error in the letter that they're printing, then they'll put a statement of fact, a fact check, which I think is helpful, and I'm glad they're doing that. But anyway, there are certain things, and for example, there are some New Earth biblical literalism folks out there that are saying that the world is only 6,000 years old. And, because they've told they have to believe the Bible and every word of the Bible or else they're going to hell, then someone has told them that, the Bible is saying it's only that old. Well, where does it say it? Well, you start with creation and then you go with the generations and then you calculate how many generations there were and how old they were, and they come up with about 6,000 years. And you know how this New Earth folks, how they deal with fossils? God created those fossils 6,000 years ago when He created the earth in order to test our faith. And this crazy, anyway, if you give equal time to this kind of stuff, people who don't really have all the background and the scientific understanding can be led astray and then get in all kinds of arguments about that instead of important things about how does God want us to treat one another? How does God want us to live in this world? And how does God want us to care for the creation that God made? And if we deny, God can go around not return evil for evil, but if someone does something bad to you and you get angry and react, the reflection on you, but also everything you're connected to. But rather we should respond in a dignified way. Now, I can't remember if it was Nelson Mandela or another one of the South African black Christian leaders, and they were, kind of primitive in some areas, and there was this big muddy area, and there were these planks that you had to walk across this muddy area in order to keep your feet clean and get to the other side on this stretch. And there were people, a group of folks, they were with him, and they were starting to cross this, and from the other direction was a South African official who rudely shouted that he would not step aside for any expletive, very racist, ugly, nasty comment. But, and if it was Nelson Mandela, he continued to walk. And they kind of came up to the middle, and his answer to this man who had said, "I will not step aside for blah, 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 blah." But Nelson Mandela, if it was he, said, "But I will." And so he didn't be hostile, he didn't create a fight, but he took thought for what was noble in the sight of all. And in his stepping aside and the way he said it, it put the reflection back on that man as making him look like a fool. And without calling him a fool, he just kind of turned it back onto him. Anyway, and that was kind of like, Jesus' thing of turn the other cheek and go the second mile. We learn from the context that Roman soldiers could make someone in their area where they were dominating and to carry something for 1 mile. But they couldn't go overboard and go any more than that. So on the second mile, the first mile, the soldier is in control. You have to obey. But you get to the end of that mile, then you can be in control. And if you start going the second mile, it puts the soldier in a very awkward position because a commanding officer can punish him, even execute him for violating the rules. And if you're going a second mile, it can appear he has ordered you to go a second mile, and so now he's at risk, you're in control, and, if you see the scene here, he can say, no, stop, put it down. And so instead of having a big fight at the beginning of the first mile and, having a big conflict that way, when someone is trying to oppress or be abusive, there are ways that we can think of and come up with that can kind of turn it around. But it's hard. You have to be creative and you have to be willing to do that. You can just kind of let them have their way, and then when it's over, go away feeling bad. But if you come up with something like that, it's empowering, and it is making some different statements. But it demonstrates your integrity and grace in the face of the conflict. And the big part is you don't lower yourself to return the same kind of evil for evil. And so that's what Paul is dealing with here. Now, if we need to be careful in succumbing to those things, but it goes on, if so far as it depends on you, meaning your actions and your behavior and your countenance and so forth. Live peaceably with all, beloved. Never avenge yourselves. Now, we've already discussed these ideas, but a new thought follows. But leave room for the wrath of God. Now, we've talked about wrath of God and what Paul is thinking about wrath of God. In Paul's mind, before and basically, it means the built-in natural consequences of doing evil and willfully committing sins against others. Leave room for the natural consequences to come to pass and to take their effect. And that it's at some time, in some way, as Maud used to say, God will get you for that. So don't get impatient and take matters into your own hands. Then, if you do, you will have lowered yourself to their level, and you will be guilty of your actions, even if what someone else has done makes them deserve what you may want to do to them or get angry and do. But rather, take another approach. Do good. Be kind. If they're hungry, feed them. If thirsty, give them drink. In other words, kill them with kindness. And Paul says, by doing this, you will heap burning coals upon their heads. And what he's getting at, I believe, is that what I said earlier, someone being hostile and hateful so often is decided that you deserve what they're doing to you, that you are an evil one, and in their self-righteous position, you deserve the punishment treatment that they're dishing out, so that if you react with revenge or return evil for evil, you will just reinforce their view that you're a bad person and you deserve what they feel about you and what they've done. And particularly if it's a public display, you not only prove to them in their own mind that you're the bad one, and that they are the good one who's disciplining you from their righteous position, but anybody else who's a witness to the conflict, that you will not be able to show your true character if you're lashing back and fighting and lowered yourself to their level, but to stay calm and figure out some way to kill them with kindness. Heap burning coals upon their head. What it does, the burning coals on their head will frustrate them in their attempt to humiliate and discredit you in public by the way they treat you. It will make them look bad if they're being ugly and you remain calm and gracious, and they will look foolish, and that will heap the burning coals on their head. It'll drive them crazy, so to speak. The heap burning coals on their heads.
Before that, it says, "It is written."
Oh, vengeance is mine.
Is he quoting the old scripture?
Oh, yes, somewhere, and sometimes he will be paraphrasing a concept, and it might not be a direct quote, but a lot of that idea comes from the prophets when they will be listing all of these bad things happening, and God's judgment is going to fall on all of the sinfulness of all these neighbors of Israel and how they're deserving of that, and God's going to make that happen. And I think it's Jeremiah. He will be listing all of those to get his own people, the Israelites, to be saying, yeah, those neighbors, they're no good. They're heathens and they live strange ways. Yeah, they're bad. Yeah, let God destroy them and do bad things. And these other ones, the Ammonites over there. Yeah, that's great. And then after he goes through rehearsing all of those neighbors who are sinful, then he comes around, and Israel, you have not been faithful to God. You have not worshipped well. by combining worship with the pagan gods, and you have not taken care of the widow and the orphan. And so now let me tell you, God is going to bring judgment and punishment on you as well. And so that's the kind of the vengeance or the wrath of God, as we discussed it, is really that it's the reading into God human feelings of, how we react to people who have break the laws and do bad things and so forth. It makes us angry, and particularly folks that maybe if we are in a supervisory position and they are insubordinate and they just don't listen, it's irritating. And so from that perspective, they're reading into God's heart and mind this anger. And so anyway, and then the vengeance and the punishment. But it's the natural consequences of so often, sort of like Pharaoh wanted the Israelites' babies to be killed because there are too many, and then one of the things that he had said, wanting that to happen, then out of his own mouth he had spoken what would then happen to the Egyptians. So anyway, but do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good is the bottom line of that thought. Anyway, there are a lot of very practical, relational, and mind processes that are within those verses of how to make love genuine, even to the unlovable who we encounter sometimes. Our love is not supposed to be based upon the deserving qualities of the other, but their need. And so often, that's why a lot of people don't behave well or act well, is because they don't feel loved. But anyway, the next chapter begins. After we've gotten through all of those things, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of the authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive its approval, for it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is the servant of God to execute wrath on wrongdoers. Therefore, one must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience. For the same reason, you also pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what is due them. Taxes to whom taxes are due. Revenue to whom revenue is due. Respect to whom respect is due. Honor to whom honor is due. Well, the idea of the Romans being a big part of this context is accurate. Not sure he's speaking so that the Romans will hear what he's saying and make his own reputation better, but these verses do seem to counter his view of the radical loyalty to Christ above all, and to God and the coming kingdom. It almost sounds like unfaithfulness to God, because obeying the civil authorities who were pagan and who often ordered citizens to worship the gods of Rome to keep the gods appeased and favorable to Rome. Because there were times when bad things would happen, and they blamed the Christians because they were not worshiping at the temple of the pagan gods. And they thought the gods were angry, and so they caused these bad things to happen, a plague or a drought or, whatever it was. And so the reality is, if you do obey those civil authorities, sometimes obeying means, burning incense or worshiping at their temples and being a part of that system of patronage where you build these relationships and you have to receive the gifts and then you're obliged to do the service. Well, receiving the gifts often is the meat from a sacrifice, and you're invited to the feast to participate. That keeps that glue between the levels on the pecking order of the patronage system. So it seems like he's contradicting his absolute strong loyalty to Christ and following Christ. But at this point, Paul seems to be thinking along different lines and thinking in a different context. A part of his frame of reference is keeping the peace and getting along with the authorities until God's ultimate plan of the coming kingdom will come into being. And he sees it coming soon. So just don't create any problems now. Go along with them for, do what you need to do to keep the peace. Because God's plan is unfolding. And there's not much we can do about it now. Just be faithful in prayer and wait because it's coming. This is a in the meantime kind of strategy for the church. And it's also a pick your fights kind of strategy. You don't need to go out and make a stand and a protest about every little issue at this point. So many things, if you make a big fuss about something at the wrong time, in the wrong situation, it becomes counterproductive. A lot of times you lose your credibility if you're making a fuss about minutia all the time. Just wait until there's a really big issue, then make your stand. That might be the right time. He's not actually saying that there, but that's what we need to be thinking about. In the theological reasoning, Paul's argument for obeying civil authorities, he really kind of launches into back to creation. In this mindset is that in creation, God brought order out of chaos. And in creating the order in the world, the seasons and the different creatures and the right kind of food and the right habitats for everything, there seems to be a reason and an order for everything. But we come to human life in communities and in nations and politics and so forth. God's ultimate will is that there will be order. And so it's consistent with God's will for order that there be civil authorities and governments, and that people go along with that civil authority and not cause trouble and disturbance and disorder in kind of the big picture. It's best to be good citizens wherever you are. And it relates back to the Old Testament mentality that God is in complete control of everything. And so if you resist the order, then if God's in control of everything and what exists is what is God's will, then for you to resist, then you're disobeying God's will in the grand scheme of things. And it's, if you remember in the story of Moses and Pharaoh, in many of that dialogue, that when Moses would come to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go," and that these plague or these bad things are going to happen, Pharaoh doesn't let the people go, but the text will begin to say God hardened Pharaoh's heart. The Old Testament mindset was nobody can resist God. You can't stand up to God. So if Pharaoh is resisting God, it's not that he can do it on his own power, but God has hardened his heart. So in that kind of thinking, it's God's will that whoever rules is the ruler, even if they're corrupt and evil. As it stated in Romans 12:19, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine." In the verses we just covered before this chapter, the mindset is God will take care of that. If that person grows to be more and more evil and corrupt, it's kind of like Saul was king and he went off the rails, and so now David has to be king. And then one king after another gets more corrupt, and all of a sudden now the state is conquered and and we're carried off into captivity. But the wrath of God, leave room for the wrath of God. I will repay. Anyway, with that thought, it's just leave it to God to judge and punish the evil and corrupt rulers. Our job is to be peaceful, obedient, law-abiding citizens wherever we are living. And a lot of that comes from living in the diaspora, being conquered by different nations at different times in the Jewish history. You have to get along with those people so that you can survive, that they won't completely crush you and eliminate you. Just hold on until God will have time to change things is a part of what he's writing about. Also, there were radical zealots in the Sicarii, the ones who were trying to be terrorists and to disrupt the rule of Rome and to not have peace. Don't get along with them. The Sicarii would, have their knives and they go into the crowds and they would stab somebody and then sneak away. And some of the people that they would eliminate wasn't just Roman officers or leaders, but some of the Jewish leaders who were cooperating. And so they were really a very present reality in the culture and in the society at the time. And so Paul is trying to tell the Christians, don't do anything to make the Romans think that we are connected with the Zealots and the Sicarii. We are not. We're peaceful, we're loving, and so don't even look like or appear to be any way related to that group who, because the Christians were separating from the Jewish community with their own time of worship. They would still try to go to the synagogues, but because of the Christian beliefs, sometimes there would be big disruptions at the synagogue, big arguments, and so the Christians appeared to be the ones that were the cause. And so between the Zealots and the mainline Jews, there were these disruptions. So he's saying, be so careful. And that's why this is so emphatic. Get along, but then he gives the theological aspect that, pay your taxes, do what you need to do in order to be good citizens in the community. Yeah. I mean, it's a real threat, and not just in a long-term kind of thing, because they didn't realize we're going to grow to be a worldwide church. They were just hanging on till Jesus comes back, till the kingdom comes next week, before next year. Barclay also suggests that Paul may have been thinking thoughts like the philosophers who inspired our revolutionary and independence movement, the Protestant Reformation, independence movement from feudalism and monarchy to lead to the American experience and British and French revolutions, violent and otherwise. And I can't remember, I didn't have time to look at it, but I think it was John Locke who proposed the idea of the social contract. Who's up on that? Is it, you're nodding, you think, yeah. I'm going back to this, don't presume to be wiser than you are. But I think it's Locke. But anyway, that concept is that the individual surrenders complete independence and freedom to do what we want in order to cooperate with the group for the common good. For the good of society, we agree to comply with the rules that the majority agrees that we should all abide by. In this town, we all agree. Anybody might remember where it's written down, but I don't. But we automatically all cooperate by driving on the right side of the road. And if we're walking, generally, if we're in a narrow space and we're going to confront somebody, generally we each one goes to the right so that we're not all always crashing into each other or, confronting each other. Step aside. So anyway, he's kind of thinks Paul is dealing a little bit with that social contract idea with the taxes. The taxes provide the goods, build the roads, provide funds to have police so that we keep the peace and order in society. It's the cost of a peaceful and orderly society. So do not resist paying your taxes and your dues. Anyway, there's a thing that sometimes I thought, if we want justification for being angry with rude people who do not follow the rules, and they just want to do what they want to do, disregarding the rights and needs of others, and we experience those people occasionally. According to Paul's argument, those people are disrespecting God and ignoring God's will for order in His creation. Their actions are not simply an inconvenience and a nuisance to you and me, but they are creating chaos and disorder. They are undermining the common good, the general welfare of the whole society. And they are creating fear and distress and producing a negative spirit. Just the fact that they make us angry has created a negative spirit in the social atmosphere. So we are completely justified with feeling angry at such people. But how can we kill them with kindness? How can we heap burning coals upon their heads without rewarding and encouraging them to continue their bad behavior? It takes some thinking and some creativity to come up with an answer to that. But to be angry with them, it's not just us being petty. It's a bigger issue. Anyway, so it can grow from personal irritation and anger to righteous indignation. They are hurting the general welfare and the good of all of us. Anyway, well, Barclay points out that Paul may have fully realized that Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, undeniably created by force and violence with the conquest, nevertheless it provided greater access for him and for the other Christians to travel and to spread the gospel. It was a blessing and a benefit. And and I've kind of processed some time, why did God act at that point in time and history to come in the person Jesus? Could have been any time, thousands of years before, hundreds of years after. Why at this particular time? Well, if it's the logic and the strategy of it, was there was this Pax Romana, where Rome had created the roads and the uniform system of governance throughout the empire. And it made it so easy for the Christian community to spread that gospel far and wide. If we look at the war-torn situation in Syria with millions of refugees, and we think how chaotic and how crazy that is, and if Christ had come in the midst of something like that, the church would have had no way of establishing communities and spreading its gospel, because everything would just be in chaos and motion. So maybe it was a part of the divine providence of the church being birthed at this time. But anyway, the peace, in terms of absence of war, was something that everyone should respect and realize that if we're going to benefit, we need to help support it with our taxes and our cooperation, again, for the general good. It reminded me of this Clive Bundy down in Nevada, who was grazing his cattle on government land and didn't want to pay the fees. And he was claiming, well, it's Nevada land, it's not federal government land, but it's still public land, and you're grazing your personal cattle and making your money at the expense of the general good, because it's our land. As if it's federal or if it's just Nevada, it's other people's land, and you're trespassing. But anyway, that whole issue was an example of what Paul is saying, and I'm thinking a lot of those militias and those anti-government folks buy into a very conservative theology if they claim to be Christians, and they haven't been reading Paul. So the next one that comes up, I think I'll find out who they are and where they are and photocopy Paul's words here and mail it to them. That if you want to be faithful to your God that you claim, you need to follow God's word. It's right here in Romans 13. Pay your taxes, pay your fees, be respectful, show honor to those to whom you should show honor, and respect to those whom you should show respect. Well, anyway, then it gets down to owe no one anything except to love one another. And here we go back to the theme, let love be genuine. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. And that's getting back to Jesus' answer to what's the most important law. And the law, the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, Clive Bundy, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in the word, love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is fulfilling of the law. Well, that's a good place to conclude. Any questions, comments, rebuttals? Well, let's close with a word of prayer. Well, dear God, we thank you for all the ways that Paul was trying to help the early church figure out how to be faithful to the commandment to love one another as I have loved you. And so it's not so easy sometimes, often challenging, but help us remember Paul's admonitions and advice, and to realize that we can use some of his thoughts and ideas to help us with the difficult times in trying to be a loving presence in the life of a world which is filled with so much conflict and disorder, that maybe we can bring some calm and some peace. In Christ's name, amen.